Here's an episode of how to analyse poetry from the Learning Cauldron. Today, we'll be looking at Carol Ann Duffy's poem in Mrs. Tilscher's class. Analysing poetry involves identifying and dissecting the literary techniques that the poet has used effectively to explore the theme or themes of a poem. In her poem, in Mrs. Tilscher's class, Carol Ann Duffy explores the themes of adolescence and growing up, innocence, change and life transitions. The poem in Mrs. Tilscher's class is based on Duffy's own experience of primary school when she was growing up in the 1960s. And this was the real name of her teacher when she was in primary 7, which is the last year of primary in a Scottish school. The title of the poem is repeated as the first line, which emphasises again how important Mrs. Tilscher was. She obviously was someone who'd had an influence on Carol Ann Duffy. The use of the word you immediately involves the reader because it's second person voice, but it's not actually talking to the reader as such because it really is Duffy herself and her classmates. This first sentence is long, which is appropriate because it's actually talking about following the path of the River Nile, and these lovely long vowels here help emphasise that, and it mentions the fact that she chanted the scenery, and this is a hark back to the way that people were taught in those days, which was where you recited things and often the class would chant after the teacher. This next sentence is very short. It's one word, it's a minor sentence, as is the next, and the next. And that is because she is listing the places that you would pause at as you went up the River Nile or down the River Nile. The use of assonance here is also effective. We've got these long A's here, making us slow down and pause, thinking about each of these destinations. And this would be a magical journey for the children as they imagine these foreign lands. A reference specifically to school in the 60s comes with the image, the metaphor, a skittle of milk, because often school children would be given milk every day at school and it came in a small bottle shaped like a skittle. No whiteboards in those days, a blackboard and chalk. So when she had done her lesson on the Nile, the pyramids perhaps that she'd drawn would be rubbed into dust. And that's a lovely word choice there, the dust, the idea of them disappearing into chalky dust, but also the reference to the past. Another reference to what school life was like in those days is the opening of the window with a long pole. Now, the reference to the window immediately makes us think of the outside world, because up until now we've just been in the class and in the classroom, the safe confines of the class, and this is the first reference of the outside world. And also the reference to a long pole, which is the way that windows were opened in those days. The laugh of a bell is personification of the bell. It sounds like the bell is alive, and it is swung by a running child. There's a feeling of innocence here and nostalgia. There's a real tone of nostalgia throughout this first stanza. The second stanza starts with a short sentence. This was better than home. And this gives us a clear impression of how comfortable Carol Ann Duffy and presumably her classmates were in their primary school classroom with the beloved Mrs. Tilscher. Another short sentence follows with the powerful word choice of enthralling, suggesting that the books kept them absolutely bewitched. And it also shows an early love of literature on Carol Ann Duffy's part. In the next line, there is a very effective simile. The classroom glowed like a sweet shop. Most primary school children love sweet shops, so for the classroom to be compared to something so highly esteemed shows again how much they enjoyed primary school and being taught by this teacher. And a sweet shop, the idea continues with sugar paper, another sentence, coloured shapes. And then a surprising one. After those two very innocent references comes a reference to something far less innocent, Brady and Hindley, who were the Moors murderers who killed children during the 1960s. But it says that faded like the faint, uneasy smudge of a mistake. So we have the outside world intruding just marginally. The children would be aware of something awful happening, but probably didn't quite understand how awful it was. And the use of the assonant you here, uneasy smudge, adds to that uncomfortable feeling there. But a smudge is a mistake that can be rubbed out. Another short sentence follows. Mrs. Tilscher loved you. They felt completely convinced of their teacher's devotion to them, and that would be a comforting thing for these primary school children. Again, the reference to the gold star shows her approval of them and that they wanted to earn that approval. The memories of primary school classrooms involve things like stationery, etc., and the scent of a pencil slowly, carefully shaved would be a relatable experience for many readers, certainly people who were at school at that time. And the sibilant S and C here are very effective in slowing this down and making us experience what she's talking about. And then there's another image here, an audio image, a xylophone's nonsense. This is almost personification of the instrument, as if it were talking nonsense, but those are simply the probably very discordant and irregular beats of someone who's just learning to play the instrument. Moving on to the third stanza, this is the turning point in the poem. There's a reference to a typical biology lesson at primary school where you would keep tadpoles in the classroom and observe them changing. And there's a lovely image here, a metaphor used to describe this process. The inky tadpoles changed from commas into exclamation marks. And this showed the change in their shape, if you think of the shape of tadpoles to start with, and then how they grow and develop. And then eventually they developed into frogs. And the tone here changes to become more serious, perhaps even a little threatening. The word choice of dunce suggests somebody stupid, and then also croaking, an unpleasant sound. And then it becomes even more sinister. A rough boy told you how you were born. And that enjambment there emphasises the shock and horror that the poet felt when she learned this information. She was no longer innocent. She reacted by kicking him, but when she got home, she stared, and this is an excellent word choice here, appall. This is a powerful word which conveys her shock and horror at the knowledge that she now had. Moving on to the fourth and final stanza, the mood has really changed now compared to the calmness in the earlier stanzas. The transferred epithet of feverish July helps to create that mood of discomfort, unease, anticipation. The air, the poet says, tasted of electricity, and here's an example of synesthesia where the senses become muddled. In the second sentence of this final stanza, there is a list: untidy, hot, fractious. You could also refer to those word choices, the fractious, conveying the rising emotions in these adolescent young people. And then it refers to the heavy, sexy sky. Lovely sibilance of S's here to emphasise this transferred epithet, where it is the rising sexual awareness of the children that's being referred to, but this is being applied to the sky. You asked her, Mrs. Tilscher, how you were born, and here the enjambment emphasises what is almost the start of a distancing of the relationship. She smiled, then turned away. She no longer has every answer for the children in her class, and that signifies a change in this relationship. Reports is a reference to the end of term, end of school perhaps, as it's the final year of primary school. And here we have some kinetic imagery. You ran through the gates, impatient to be grown. So there's a feeling here, a tone of anticipation and excitement, and then some pathetic fallacy where the weather conditions mirror the emotions of the people involved. The sky split, nice sibilance, open into a thunderstorm, and the thunderstorm foreshadows the storms of adolescence that await Carol Ann Duffy and the other classmates. I hope that's been helpful. See you next time.